Gardening can be a frustrating and challenging activity sometimes, especially when plants just die. But remember, gardening is not just about growing plants, it's about the joy that comes with all of that. If you are a returning visitor to my channel, hey, I'm so glad you're here. But if you're new here, welcome. I'm Roxana, and this channel is where I share my love for gardening. I document what I have going on outside and indoors as well. And I hope that you can find something that is helpful for your own garden. Gardening for me, it's such a rewarding hobby, but it's also one that requires knowledge, skill, and a lot of experience to be somewhat successful. If you follow other gardeners in social media, you get to see their gorgeous places, their beautiful flowers, their amazing harvests. They must have a green thumb, right? And if you're not familiar with the term, green thumb basically means a person that grows plants very easily. I personally don't believe that a person can have a green thumb. I believe that getting educated and having constant practice year after year makes us all better gardeners. But sometimes reading books, having all of that experience and practice, or having a green thumb is just not enough. If you have been gardening for a while and had a very challenging year in your own garden in 2022, know that you are not alone. And if you are new to gardening, I hope that this video is encouraging for you in knowing that even for some experienced gardeners, there are some years that are better than others. But there is always next year. I decided to invite some friends over from other parts of the country where they garden to share with us one of their failures, one of their struggles that they had in their garden, and I'll be sharing a couple of my own failures myself. But before we start with those, I would like to know, what was your struggle in your garden? What were the challenges? Did something just die? You couldn't get anything to germinate? Tell me. And I encourage you to check other people's comments to see if maybe something that they struggled with was the same thing that happened to you. As many of you know, I start a bunch of seeds indoors. I have a nice setup where I start flowers, vegetables, and one of the flowers that I started in year 1, this year is my year 4, from seed is snapdragons. And I have never had any problems getting those plants to germinate up until this year. Some of the seeds that I put in the small containers with seed starting mix did okay. They came up, they germinated. If I had to guess, I will say that 40% of those seeds germinated, not bad. The seed was brand new, it came out from a quality grower. I didn't think that the seed was the problem, but as soon as they broke the soil and they started to get going a little bit, they were struggling. They didn't grow and they were just very, very sad looking. I believe that that failure happened because my room, this room where I start most of my seeds, is very, very warm. And snapdragons is one of those seeds that just require a little bit more of the cool side to get to germinate. And don't get me wrong, the past years I have done it correctly. I don't know what changed. I don't know if maybe the soil was bad. I don't know if maybe I forgot to water it a little bit too often. I don't know, but I didn't get any snapdragons. And honestly, I don't think that I try a second time just because I had so many things going, so many things growing inside already that just having snapdragons wasn't a big deal for me last year. But this year I am going to try and have them germinate or start growing in another room, in a cooler room. And once they get to germinate, I'll move it into this room because this is where I have my LED light setups for them to grow. So we'll see how that goes. Again, I am just going to buy new seeds. I'm going to try a new company maybe. Sometimes you don't know if the batch of seeds was bad. I honestly don't think that was the case for me, but my snapdragons, very bad. And another one of my failures for last year, for 2022, was my tomatoes. I love tomatoes. I think that my love for tomatoes started when I started growing them from seed. When I started taking over the vegetable side of my garden, I started trying new varieties and I just fell in love with tomatoes. So again, I start all of my tomatoes from seed. I didn't have any problems with the plants with the seeds germinating or growing indoors. They were gorgeous. They were absolutely gorgeous plants, healthy plants by the time that I took them outside. Here in Indiana, the first week of May, around the first week of May, is when we are able to take all of our vegetables, heat-loving plants outside. We are safe from the frost time. So the first week in May, I took them outside. They were gorgeous. I didn't have any problems whatsoever. But then a week later, we had a horrible heat wave. And the plants had just been outside for a couple of weeks. They weren't really completely acclimated to being outside, and 95+ degree weather came, and it wasn't just a day or two. I believe we have like 3 or 4 consecutive days with the heat, and a lot of my plants just die, especially tomato plants. And the plants that did survive that heat wave struggled to recuperate. They started growing very slow. And don't get me wrong, I had tomatoes to harvest, but I didn't have enough tomatoes to do any canning or do any storage for later months. In 2022, I had about 42 tomato plants, and from those, I believe half of them were lost to the heat, and the ones that did start making some fruit were either very late or had trouble, they were sick, and it was just not a very good year for tomatoes, at least in my experience. And I have talked to other people here in Indiana locally that they also agree that 2022 just sucked for growing tomatoes. Again, I did have some tomatoes here and there. Losing a lot of those tomatoes was heartbroken, but I still had some tomatoes, enough for making dinner or for using it in other dishes, but not for storing them. But that was just for my big slicers beefsteak tomatoes. My cherry tomatoes, on the other hand, did excellent. They did not care about the heat, they did not care about the heat wave, and they produced just beautifully. If you're interested in my favorite cherry tomato, Sun Sugar cherry tomatoes are absolutely the best. And I'm gonna let my friends share their own struggles and their own failures in their garden in 2022.
Hi there, my name is Cicero and I garden in Zone 5B, Ohio. And Roxana asked, what was my garden fail for 2022? And it just so happens that I have one that is very recent, and that was my fall sowing undercover. It started off really good, and then once it came time to actually cover these plants, I don't know what happened. I think I just got over, I had too many things to do. I think that's what it was, and I wasn't really paying attention to it. So I covered it, and then at some point along the lines with the snow and the cold, all of my plants died. Let me show you what that looks like. So here they both are, and on the outside they look great, like they would work perfectly. But what happened was I didn't cover them properly, and I didn't make sure that during the windy days and the extremely cold days that the plastic was sealed. So we just had a polar vortex here in Ohio where our winds were down to -30s and our temperatures were in the low teens and negatives for many days. So take a look. All of the fall planted veggies are dead. Big fail, guys. And then in this bed is the exact same thing, and this one was even covered a little bit better than the other. However, in those extreme temperatures, I didn't take any extra precautions. So when the wind was blowing, the flaps on these were blowing open. There was no protection for these plants. They were basically exposed to the elements, because as the wind would blow, that cold air would go in there and freeze the plants. So it's unfortunate, and it's a lesson learned to pay attention to the weather and to make sure that I'm checking on these plants every day, because it got to the point where, you know, I was so busy with life that I just didn't even come and look at them anymore. So it's my fault. I missed out on some really great plants, and lesson learned for next year. Pay more attention to the weather and check on your plants. So that's my biggest garden fail from 2022. Thank you, Roxana. Happy gardening!
Hi everyone, my name is Emmanuel Arce, well known to be the ultimate gardener. I'm a 16-year-old gardener down here in South Florida that tries to grow everything possible in my small urban backyard garden. So like I live in South Florida, that means I do live in a hot climate zone. I live in a temperate climate, which means that we have no winter, which means we have an elongated growing season, which we're able to grow whatever we want even during the coldest periods of the year. And so I was asked, what was my biggest failure for the year 2022? Well, of course, in the garden, there's always going to be mistakes and failures because no gardener is perfect and we always learn from these mistakes. So my biggest failure for the year 2022 has to be the plant or crop zucchini/squash. So a little background story on my failure was I started zucchini from seed, which is one of the easiest crops to grow from seed because how big the seed is and how little time it takes to germinate. And so I was able to grow them perfectly fine up until they started producing female flowers. As you guys know, in any type of crop out there, when they're producing a female flower or when they're actually producing fruit for you, all the energy is sucked up from the plant and focused on that particular area of the plant, which is the female flower. And so that makes the plant more viable and more weak when it comes to pests and diseases, which that's what happened with my zucchini. So when my zucchini plant was producing female flowers, it kind of made the plant more viable and powdery mildew decided to attack my plants. So I noticed the early signs and I decided to treat it, but powdery mildew loves humidity, and here in South Florida it is humid everywhere, which means it's a breeding ground for powdery mildew. Every single time I try to treat the powdery mildew, it seemed to get worse day by day. Every single time I try to treat it, and so I gave up. The first plant died and I had to take it out and completely throw it away in the trash because of course I don't want this disease spreading in my garden. But I did leave a bigger zucchini in the ground because it was still producing female flowers and I didn't want to lose all hope yet. I still treated that zucchini, although it did no effect on the powdery mildew, and at one point it produced a very nice sized female flower. Once that female flower opened up, I realized there was no male flowers to be seen. So that means that no pollination was done, which means I lost the female flower. And so I completely gave up and I threw the zucchini away because it was a lot of work and effort I have put into these crops to not get no zucchini at all. And so zucchini has been one of the biggest failures in my entire garden. And I say squash in general because I did try to grow a Casper pumpkin around fall time, which was really late on my part. But it was growing really pretty until the powdery mildew did come and settled on the squash and did take it over, and then it completely destroyed my squash. And so I was completely devastated and decided that I was gonna retry again when the humidity levels are way lower. During the winter temperatures, that's when we don't have humidity at all. That's when we have mainly air. So I'm gonna of course retry again because I don't wanna give hopes up yet when it comes to squash and zucchini. So once again, zucchini and squash was my biggest failure for the year 2022.
Hi everyone, I'm Matthew from the Southerners Northern Garden. I garden in Southwest Ohio, Zone 6, only about 2 or 3 hours east from where Roxana gardens in Indiana. I've been rapidly expanding my garden over the past 4 years and been carrying people along on that journey for the past 2 on YouTube. My primary focus is ornamental shrubs and trees, but I also do vegetable gardening. The primary thing is I want to make gardening simple and try and keep things as easy as possible with upkeep. And so what I'm going to be talking to you about today is a failure that I had in 2022, and that failure is fruit trees. 3 years ago, I went out to a local garden center, picked up a cherry, peach, pear, and apple tree, and planted them in the ground in the backyard. And then 3 years later, in 2022, I found myself cutting every one of those trees down because they would not perform. So a few considerations I want you to look into before you just run out there this spring and purchase fruit trees. I think you'll primarily find fruit trees in the spring. It's a good idea to plant trees in the fall, but for some reason our local garden centers do not carry a lot of fruit trees in the fall. What I would encourage you to do first is to take a soil test. If you've never taken a soil test of your soil, you'll probably want to know how acidic or basic or neutral your soil is, specifically if you're going to be growing something like blueberries. Here in Southwest Ohio on my property, we have pretty alkaline soil, and so I tried to plant some blueberries in the ground and they have not thrived. A couple years ago, I moved those into raised bed containers where I could control the pH a little better, and they've done much better. The second thing I would reiterate is before you go out there and just buy any fruit tree, do your research first. You want to know how early that fruit tree blooms. One of the issues I've had on the trees that I removed last year was we tend to have pretty late frost here. So some of the varieties that I picked would bloom a little earlier, then they would get nipped by frost. And if you're unwilling to cover your trees, that's just something you're going to have to deal with. So when I went to purchase my trees, I picked out trees that were of fruit-bearing age, and I never got any real fruit from them. I always had the peach usually got hit by late frost. I never got any apple blooms. They were always hit by frost. I ended up getting a couple pears, and then I think I got maybe 2 or 3 cherries off my cherry tree in the 3 years that it was out there. Another consideration is typically how wet your springs can be. And so for here, we tend to have a really wet spring, and that invites disease. Fruit trees need spraying, organic sprays like a dormant oil 2, sometimes 3 times in winter, and that's not something that I really wanted to do, was get out there and spray early winter after I've already wrapped up a lot of my gardening, and then get out there again in the cold and spray my fruit trees in late winter, early spring to kind of cover those buds. Some fruit trees also need just an organic pesticide sprayed on them to keep bugs off of them. So the upkeep of fruit trees can be a little more difficult than people realize. And because I try and focus on things that are easy to take care of in my garden, it's something that I always just never got to. And so one issue, because we had really wet springs, is my peach tree always developed peach leaf tree curl. It's not necessarily dangerous for the tree, and the tree can survive, but it causes really bad curling of the leaves. Additionally, I had peach canker develop. Peach canker is generally also pretty curable. You can cut off the limbs. However, mine developed on the trunk, so I knew that tree was going to have to come out anyway. Last year was also really bad too, because my pear tree developed fire blight, which is where some of the limbs completely turn black, and the leaves also turn black, and they just completely die. So I cut that one down last year. Since I hadn't received any apples over the past few years, I went ahead and removed that tree. And then my cherry tree I also removed because birds were picking off the cherries. So overall, my advice, if you're interested in purchasing fruit trees, is to very much research the variety you're purchasing. Know when it blooms, preferably if you're in a colder zone where there's late frost, pick one that blooms late. Pick some that are self-pollinating, so you don't have to buy multiple varieties if you have a small location where you can add fruit trees. Make sure you're one of those persons who are going to be able to get out there and do your sprays and treatments on the tree so you can actually get fruit. Sometimes you'll need to cover the trees to prevent pests and birds from getting them. And lastly, if it just isn't working out for you, I always encourage someone to take out the tree or the shrub that you're having issues with. If it's not bringing you joy, certainly get rid of it. Thank you guys for following along.
Hello everybody, I'm Joanne Blondin. Thank you so much, Roxana, for inviting me to share with you, the viewer, my biggest garden mistake in 2022. So if you've been following along, you're probably seeing content on our channel that's more from 2019. We're trying to bring people up to speed to where we are right now in our garden. We have 2 gardens. We have a city garden and we have a rural property. Our city garden in 2020, we started to build some raised beds and started growing food there. And then in 2021 and into 2022, we started to build an entire food forest in our rural property. And so it has been a tremendous amount of learning and growth and opportunity to make mistakes. And so I can't pin it down to one mistake. I can pin it down to hundreds of mistakes and learning opportunities, from learning how to do mushrooms and bees and chickens, learning how to do raised beds, and then have successful vegetable gardens, and trying to figure out how to do all of the preserving that comes with abundance in your garden. Learning how to manage 2 gardens well, and particularly during a drought in the city, which it didn't matter if I had watering every 2 days, it just couldn't grow vegetables, to our rural property surviving a Derico, which is a massive windstorm that came through, and then missing by a kilometer, another tornado a couple of months later, power out, not able to water with our pump because we had no electricity. It was so many opportunities to learn, to figure out backup systems, to figure out other ways to collaborate. I would say our biggest sort of mistake was not realizing the scope of the project that we were taking on. But the biggest opportunity for growth and for learning was to figure out how we could work together as a team and how we could understand each other's strengths. If you were better at building, better at lawn care, better at watering, better at preserving, and understanding that each of us had a sort of a role to play. And that was our biggest, I would say, challenge, was to figure out how we could respect each other's boundaries and be able to say, like, hey, I get it. You don't want to do that project today. I'd like you to do it, but you are not interested in doing it because you have actually 10 other projects that you deem to be a priority that I don't even know you're about to do. So it has been such a great opportunity to grow and to make mistakes. And I just want to say congratulations to every single person here on YouTube who is sharing their gardening experience. Every opportunity that we had to learn, we turned over to YouTube and we found somebody else that was also experiencing that same challenge, had figured out how to solve it, from problems with our greenhouse to building a composting system. We relied on YouTube as part of our journey. We also have like a ton of books. You can see I have lots of gardening books and recipe books. So we have a good foundation for the knowledge to build on, but I just want to say thank you. It's through learning that we're all growing together. Thanks a lot, Roxanne. I appreciate you asking me to join your group of fine gardeners to share my learning.
Hey guys, my name is Michelle. On social media, I go by Gardens and Chickens. I'm on Instagram and pretty new to the YouTube world, but on there I share about my gardens and my chickens. I live in your pretty standard suburban neighborhood. So I'm on just under half an acre, and in that half an acre, I try to maximize that space, cram in as many gorgeous plants as I can because I just love it. And then also we have a snack garden, fruits, and chickens, obviously. So I garden in a zone 7B to 8A. We're right on the cusp. What that means is we have very, very hot summers, mostly mild winters, and pretty short springs. Sometimes we get fall color, sometimes we don't. It's kind of a toss-up. Our soil here is very much clay soil and something that we just learned to garden with. So those are the kind of things I share over on my channel, but I'm here to share with you my biggest fail of 2022. And I don't know if it's fair to call it a fail, but it's something that I struggled with last year and something that I want to do better with this year and find systems to help with. And that is watering. This year in Atlanta, but also much of the nation, suffered with drought-like conditions, and I don't think it's gonna get any better, guys. Like I think this is just gonna be our way of life, and what we need to do is try to create systems around getting better at watering. So I personally don't have the budget right now to fully drip line my entire garden. I wish I did, but what I'm going to try to do is see if I can add some more spigots around the house. Maybe that might be one option so that I have more hoses. I also do really love the HOSELINK hose. That makes it easier to both get the hose out and then put it away so that my kids aren't tripping on it later. Another thing that I want to start doing is making sure that I have hoses going off automatically to water things, especially pots. I saw a really cool pot watering system that I want to try out for some of the pots that I have around my patio. I love having that look where you have got multiple pots with different things in them and just that layered effect, and it's totally gorgeous. I did it this summer, but then I'd say a third of them died because life, right? Summer's a busy time for everyone, especially if you're a mom. So it's hard, it's so hard. So that's what I'm gonna be doing next year, is working to create more systems and implementing them so that summers are less hard. Hope that helps.
Again, I hope that this video was encouraging for you guys, knowing that if you struggled in your garden last year, that you were not alone. I hope that if you are a new gardener that you started and maybe this was your first year, if you had a lot of failures, if a lot of things just died, I hope that you do not give up. I hope that you keep on trying, because that's what we're all doing. We're just trying year after year. Thank you for being here, you guys. I hope that you guys are getting prepared for the 2023 seed starting season. And until the next time.